Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Colden Company's presentation, What You Need to Know About Cybersecurity Insurance. My name is Jim Lapointe. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature inside of WebEx, and we'll get to questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, before we start, just a little bit about Colden Company. Colden Company is an information technology service organization. We're computer guys and gals. Been in business since 2003, so 17 years now. And we have two offices, one in St. Augustine, Florida, as well as one in Ballston Spa, New York. Our customer footprint extends into 15 states as well as outside the United States. And we have many leading technical certifications. We are security certified as well, which is pertinent for today's presentation. Okay, so enough about us. Let's dive into our agenda. We're going to talk today about why cybersecurity insurance is important. Then we're going to talk about the pitfalls to look out for with cybersecurity insurance. Then we'll get into some mitigation. How do you mitigate those pitfalls? And end up with some question and answer. Okay, so I'm going to open up a poll question to kind of start us off here. And that poll question is, do you have cybersecurity insurance today? So if you could go ahead and answer that, I'll go ahead and continue on to the next slide. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you do not, and that fits. So according to the latest statistics that I've seen, somewhere in the mid-30s. I've seen statistics from 34 to 38% of businesses presently have cybersecurity insurance. That number is expected to grow pretty rapidly over the next few years. I was reading recently that they expect this industry to go from a $4 billion a year industry to a $23 billion a year industry in the next 5 years. So we expect to see a lot of growth. And the reason for that is because the threats to businesses continue to increase. So the cybersecurity landscape out there today is as dangerous as it's ever been. Hacking is still growing, particularly in nation-state attacks. You may have heard about some particular strains of ransomware called Petya, which was delivered by the North Korean government. There's also one cleverly named not Petya, which is a similar strain of ransomware to Petya. And those ransomware attacks were very, very successful, unfortunately, and we're continuing to see those grow. We're going to talk about the Sony hack in a little while, which was largely believed to be from North Korea. But also private hackers have been very, very successful. And I've got a graphic here to remind myself to talk about the way I view it is a game of cat and mouse. So the hackers are the mouse, and the security professionals are the cat, trying to stop these bad guys from doing what it is that they do. And unfortunately, because ransomware has been such a boon for hackers, that I always like to say the mouse is on steroids now. They've gotten an influx of cash, so they now have more resources to hone their craft to make their viruses and their attacks more stealthy and more dangerous. So ransomware was really a game changer. Allowed hackers to directly monetize their hacking. So instead of just hacking in, stealing information that they would in turn sell to other criminals on the dark web, now they've hacked into legitimate businesses and are monetizing that by extorting legitimate businesses and legitimate people. So it's unfortunate that that's been so successful, because now hacks are evolving and becoming a lot more sophisticated. So a few statistics for you here. 68% of business leaders feel like their cybersecurity risks are increasing. Now, 62% of businesses experienced an attack in 2019. So that may be why many businesses feel like their risks are increasing, because they're seeing it. They're being attacked more. You can tell and you can feel it. You can see it in your email. You know, that's one of the reasons why many business leaders feel that cybersecurity risks are increasing. And as I mentioned, they're becoming more sophisticated, they're evolving. Microsoft PowerShell is a very powerful scripting tool. Malicious PowerShell attacks were up over 1,000% last year, and that's from a semantic study. Okay, this next one, I apologize if it's difficult to read this particular graphic here, but what this is a study of what are the biggest risks to businesses today. And we're not just talking about technology here, we're talking about everything. You can see down here we've got climate change, market developments, changes in legislation, so we're talking broadly here. And business leaders responded by saying cyber incidents is the #1 concern that they have. It's the biggest risk to business today. And that's why cyber insurance is important, right? Because the risk is there, the threats are there. Okay, so the point of these first few slides is to set the stage for what the current climate is, what the environment is today for the threat landscape, and it is a dangerous one. So on top of that, cybersecurity insurance is important because governments are taking compliance more seriously. Now, if any of you sat in on our compliance webinar a month or two ago, this slide and the next one are going to look familiar because they applied to that as well. So they are really the same slides I took from my compliance webinar here. So if any of you remember the Target breach, they were breached because of an HVAC vendor that connected to their network and essentially poked a hole in their network, allowing the hackers to get into the Target network and pull off millions of transactions and customer information. Target had to settle that with 47 different states over the breach. They were fined $18.5 million. They estimate their total cost of remediation over $200 million. Target had a cybersecurity policy. I was fortunate enough to go to a webinar, not a webinar, it was actually an in-person seminar given by the Chief Technology Officer at the time for Target. So he was the guy in charge at the time of the breach. So I got a lot of insights. He is no longer working for Target, but the incident had such an effect on him, he kind of dedicated himself to cybersecurity and now does cybersecurity as a business. So the cyber insurance that Target had did not cover their losses, at least in full. For those of you out in healthcare, we mentioned this last time as well, Accretive Health was fined $1.5 million for a stolen laptop that contained electronic private health information. But what was really telling is if you looked at the value of this public company from the date of the breach to 1 year later, the company lost $688 million in value over that year, largely because of the breach. Cyber insurance can help cover some of those expenses. And Oregon Health and Science University, they were fined $2.7 million, and that was because of a stolen laptop. So the fines are increasing out there. Governments are taking cybersecurity more seriously. That's another reason why cybersecurity insurance is important. Okay, so I think we've set the landscape there. Let's transition to our second topic here, which is what are some of the pitfalls of cybersecurity insurance? Well, #1, just like any insurance, the insurance companies don't like to pay out. They are for-profit businesses, just like health insurance, just like car insurance and anything else. They're going to find a way to pay you as little as they can, right? That's the insurance business. Failure to have proper cybersecurity measures in place and what the industry calls due care may mean that you don't get paid. If you are not compliant with regulations for your industry that you should comply with, that may mean that you don't get paid. I'm going to give you a couple of high-profile examples here. Sony. So the Sony hack, everybody remembers because it was very newsworthy. What happened there is there was a group that called themselves the Guardians of Peace. Later on determined that that was really the North Korean government sponsoring them, but they hacked into Sony servers and stole terabytes of information. Then they deleted everything off the servers and sent Sony messages saying, "Aha, we've got all your data here." And really, they tried to use that to extort Sony. And they were threatening to release sensitive information. They also demanded they pull the movie called The Interview, which depicted North Korea very poorly. Incidentally, Sony actually did pull the movie, but then they got some pressure from the United States government and said, hey, you can't give in to hackers. So they put the movie back out and paid the price. So the hackers then proceeded to release copies of not yet released movies on public sharing sites. They sent embarrassing emails to many different news organizations around the world. It was a very, very damaging event for Sony. So Sony, in turn, turned to its cyber insurance policy from Zurich to recoup some of their costs and ended up finding themselves in a battle. Zurich said, no, your policy does not cover those things. And that ended up reaching the New York State Supreme Court. So this was back in 2014. The industry was really young then. It's still young. But there was a lot of ambiguity in their policy, which led to a very protracted court battle. Didn't work out so well for Sony. Another example, I won't go into all the details, but P.F. Chang's. They were hacked. They received a $1.9 million fine for not being PCI compliant because they had credit card information stolen. And their insurance carrier said, no, you did not comply with the PCI data security standards, so we're not covering that. And P.F. Chang's had to foot the bill themselves. So cyber insurance may not be for everyone if your cybersecurity program is lacking. So if you're not doing that due care that the cyber insurance companies are looking for, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to not get paid. So what we see in a lot of businesses is the thinking that, okay, I don't have the best cybersecurity in the world, so I'm going to get cybersecurity insurance to cover me just in case. And that is flawed thinking, because the chances are you're not going to get paid out should you need it. So then that makes it a decision point for a business. Do you want to put your money into a high-priced policy that may or may not pay out, or are you better off just putting that money into improving your cybersecurity programs, which are really going to protect you in the first place? So that's a decision that each and every business has to make for themselves. But my general point here is if your thought process is, yeah, I don't really have everything I need for cybersecurity, so I'm going to get a cybersecurity insurance policy to cover me, that is flawed thinking. Okay, some other pitfalls of cyber insurance. As I mentioned, the industry is still very young. Coverage varies greatly from vendor to vendor. So you could get a policy from vendor A that is very, very different from a policy from vendor B. So that is still being flushed out. Intellectual property loss is generally never covered in any of these policies. And what we're seeing are premiums rising at a very, very fast pace. So I mentioned earlier, the reason for that is insurance companies are kind of finding out, gee, there's a lot of attacking going on. There's a lot of hacking. You know, we're being asked to cover expenses a lot more than we probably anticipated here. So the premiums are going up. So as I mentioned as well, I've got a statistic here at 38% of businesses today have cyber insurance. We expect that number to continually rise over the next 5 years here. Okay, given some of the pitfalls that I've mentioned here, I'm going to open up a second poll question here. And that poll question is, are you confident that your cybersecurity policy would pay out should you need it? Based on the fact that the majority of the folks here today don't have cybersecurity insurance, this question may be kind of a moot question for you guys. Okay, so I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of confidence out there in your cybersecurity policy, and that's probably warranted. It's worth looking at your policy. So let's move forward here, and I'm going to move on to the next topic here, which is how are we going to mitigate some of those pitfalls that we mentioned. So number one, step one is always have some good basic cybersecurity principles in place. Again, we're talking about the due care that the industry is looking for. Do you have an employee awareness training program? Are you doing regular security audits or risk assessments? Are you proactively monitoring for attacks? Do you understand what your compliance needs are as a business? Those are things that you want to have ironed out first as a step one before going ahead and looking at your policies. Step two, now when you do look at a policy, there are things that you want to look at. Number one, make sure that your policy covers retroactive breaches. So for example, if you sign on with a company for cyber insurance, and it's June 2020 here, and lo and behold, there was actually a breach you didn't know about last year, and there's a bunch of your company's data sitting on the dark web. Sometimes it takes a while for that to get exposed. What those bad guys are doing is looking for a buyer for that information. So it may be a period of time before you actually know or find out that you've had a breach. If your policy does not cover a retroactive breach, it's only going to cover you from the date that you sign on forward. So that's something to look at. Next bullet point here, really important. Every policy is going to have an exclusion clause. Look at that in detail. Make sure you understand what it is the policyholder or the insurance company is saying is excluded from coverage. That is going to be a telltale of how good your policy really is. A good policy is going to cover penalties. A good policy is going to cover equipment damage in an attack. So if hackers go in there and damage some of your equipment by changing settings and messing up your firewall, as an example, you want that to be covered in an attack. You want to make sure it covers social engineering. It wants to cover lost income from a disruption. So those are good things to help you avoid some of the pitfalls. And my apologies for the graphic here. If any of you know where that's from, there was a video game called Pitfall. It was an old Atari game. It was my first experience with video games when I was a kid. My cousin had it, and I was enthralled with Pitfall and saw that graphic and wanted to include it here. Okay, so how can we help here at Colden Company? So we've talked about the combination of due care and a good cybersecurity policy is really going to be the best way to ensure that your cybersecurity insurance policy pays out if you need it. So at Colden Company here, we have a program that is in partnership with Chubb Limited Insurance. If you don't know who Chubb is, they're the largest commercial insurance provider in the United States. And our program with them consists of two things. It consists of a cybersecurity program, so that's where we come in. So what Chubb has done is gotten together with other insurance vendors and said, this is really what we're looking for. This is what we would like to see businesses doing if we're going to be offering cybersecurity insurance to them. And they put that in a program. There's a company called Kaseya out there. They're very big in the technology world. Chubb has partnered with Kaseya, and Colden Company is a Kaseya partner here. So we would go through that cybersecurity program that they've put together that lists all of the due care that you as a business should be doing. So you're taking those measures to protect your business, which in and of itself is going to do good things for your business. In combination with that, because you're enrolled in that, you're also going to be offered a cybersecurity policy from Chubb. And that is a policy direct with Chubb, so it's not through Colden Company, but it's in a partnership, I guess. So your odds of getting paid out are going to be dramatically increased when you're enrolled in this program, because Chubb is going to see, aha, they're enrolled in our due care program here, and they're in our program, so your likelihood of getting paid out is tenfold greater than with a random policy. So the policy is, of course, important as well, and a lot of those pitfalls that I mentioned 2 slides ago, the Chubb policy covers. So we've looked at that policy in detail to make sure that it's covering the types of things that we think a cybersecurity policy should be covering. So we really feel like we've got the best of both worlds there with the cybersecurity program and a good policy. So let's summarize here. Why is cybersecurity important? Because the risk of cybercrime is significant and it continues to grow. The details matter with your cybersecurity policy. We talked about some specific things that you want to look for in your cybersecurity policy. We noted that cyber insurance is not a substitute for a good cybersecurity program. In fact, it may be a hindrance to getting good cybersecurity insurance. And it's flawed thinking to think that a cybersecurity insurance policy will cover for lack of security. That will lead to disappointment. And the program that we've come up with here in partnership with Chubb really helps ensure that coverage is going to be there when you need it while bolstering your cybersecurity program. It's going to give you both of those two components, the due care and an adequate policy. Okay, we always like to end with this slide here. If you're running your business the same way you were 2 or 3 years ago, you're not staying the same, you're falling behind. We mentioned that every year the amount of businesses that have cybersecurity insurance continues to rise year after year, and maybe something that you as a business want to look into as well. Okay, at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. And I see that we've got a few here. So while I'm getting to those, I'm going to put my contact information up on the screen here. So if you are interested in talking about the policy or just have general questions, feel free to reach out to me. My extension is 102, so if you dial that phone number on your screen, hit extension 102, that comes to me directly. And of course, my email address is there as well. Okay, so first question is, can we couple this with our own cybersecurity policy? So if the answer to that is, if you're talking about the specific program we have with Chubb, no, those two things kind of go together. It's their due care program along with their policy. But if you do have your own cybersecurity policy, there's nothing saying we can't go in and do some due care documentation for you, and we do that, put in measures in place so that you have documentation to show due care for your insurance provider should you need it, should you have a breach. So I guess the technical answer is no, you can't couple your own policy with our particular program, but if you have your own insurance, we can certainly help you get the due care and kind of make your own program, so to speak. Number 2, will cyber insurance cover ransomware? I assume you mean the ransom from ransomware. And the answer to that depends on your policy. So that's where you really got to look at the details of your policy and see what's in the exclusions, what exactly is it going to cover. Finally, about how much is a policy for a small company? That's a good question. The policy varies in price depending on size. So depending on what your idea of a small company is, it could be anywhere from $1,200 a year up to $3,000 or $4,000 a year, depending on company size. So that's probably something we have to look at individually, because they do look at things like employee count, number of computers, those types of things. And it's a tiered-based pricing system. So those are the questions, but feel free to reach out to me directly with information and I can get you more exact numbers. Okay, that is all the questions that came in. Actually finished 5 minutes early this month. They usually go right to 11:30, but it looks like we're finished a few minutes early. So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today and appreciate it. I hope everyone's staying safe and doing well. And we're here to help in any way we can. So please reach out to us either by phone or by email if we can help in any way. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a wonderful day.